not like to appear or to be seen, just turn off your video function. The second remark, if you have any questions already during the press conference, please use the chat function. We will address then your question in the Q&A session that is following our press conference. We will start our meeting today with a short view on our new report presented 3 days before the International Day of Human Rights on next Friday. And my colleague Madeleine Enzelberger will start. She has a background in conflict management and security politics. She studied political science in Vienna, Constance, and York. And before she joined our observatory in 2020, she did field research in Iraq about persecuted Christians and international religious freedom policy. Madeleine, thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Martin, for your introductory words. And welcome, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming and joining us today. And especially also want to thank our guest speakers that they're taking the time to talk on this very important issue. So first of all, maybe not all of you know the observatory and the work that we're doing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about us. So the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe was founded a little bit over 10 years ago. And the reason was because there was this new phenomenon that Christians are currently facing that was sadly not addressed by anybody else. So what is it that we mainly do? So we mainly research, analyze, and report on this new phenomenon. But we also want to raise awareness on the issue. We also want to empower Christians to tell their stories. And we want to educate and inform the wider public about this increasing trend that Christians are facing. And lastly, we also want to emphasize the vital role that religion plays in a mature and healthy society. I would say, as the rather descriptive name of our organization already suggests, we are working on cases of intolerance and discrimination against Christians in Europe. So to give you some numbers, in the last 10 years, we have collected over 4,000 cases so far. And I would say that over the 70%, so the bigger majority of those 4,000 cases are cases of hate crimes that have been committed against Christians with an anti-Christian motive. Those hate crimes, as Martin already mentioned, we are in cooperation with the OSCE, are then reported also to the OSCE for their annual hate crime report. The rest of the 30% of the cases that we have in our archive is usually connected to changes of legislation that infringe on the human rights of Christians, such as religious freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, but also parental rights. So those are some of the aspects that I will also present to you today when we're talking about our report. So what is it that I want to present to you today? What did we find in our report? So the title of the report is Under Pressure, Human Rights of Christians in Europe, Top 5. And it looks at the time period of 2019 and 2020. In this report, we focused on 5 European countries, which are France, Germany, Spain, Sweden, and the UK. We focused on them because we saw that the basic human rights of Christians in them are coming more and more under pressure. What was our main motivation to conduct this research is that when we started to analyze our collected cases and also the other research that we conducted along the way, we saw that there were some very concerning but yet unaddressed trends happening in Europe. And also that there is a huge lack in research concerning this issue. But this also meant, because there was this huge lack, that we were going into a rather new field, which meant that we had to apply an explorative research design. And that's also the reason why the report says that it is only preliminary, because it is one of the first steps in that field. And additionally to that, we try to uncover a social phenomenon that is very hard to grasp because of the underlying dynamics that I will address later on as well. So coming back to our methodology, just a short notice. So what is it that we do? We did for this, specifically for this report, we conducted extensive questionnaires in those 5 countries that have over than 144 questions. Those were then answered by experts, but also lay people. And in addition to the extensive questionnaire, we also conducted in-depth interviews, especially on the topic of freedom of speech. And I have to say, although we tried to be as comprehensive as possible in our research, it is still not at the stage where we would want to make any general claims at the moment. So nevertheless, it is worth reading into the report and giving attention to this crucial topic. So what are the trends that we found in the report? We saw that the number of hate crimes definitely increased over the last years, but also that the number of Christians who are facing criminal charges or lost their jobs because of what they privately or publicly said, or which organizations they supported, increased. We also discovered a high rate of self-censorship among Christians, and especially university students. And sadly, we also heard many stories of Christian converts with a Muslim background who suffered intolerance, and in some cases even violence from their families and community. Overall, it can be said that we observed an extensive marginalization and stigmatization of Christians in various crucial areas of life and by a variety of vectors. So before we go into more details, I think it is important to define who we are actually talking about, because mostly when we talk about Christians and that they face intolerance and discrimination, people will ask us, well, Christians are a minority, so who are you talking about? Is this actually real? So the Christians we are talking about are mainly committed Christians who really walk in their faith on a daily basis. So for them, their faith is not just a cultural heritage thing or a lifestyle or a hobby that they chose, but it truly defines who they are. So what are the concrete findings that we uncovered? As I already said, we identified the 5 European countries in which the freedoms of Christians have been most infringed. So France, Germany, Spain, Sweden, and the UK. We also saw that hate crimes against Christians increased by 70% from 2019 to 2020, which can also be found in the OSCE hate crime report that was just published 2 weeks ago. And then we saw that there is mainly 2 dynamics that are behind this new phenomenon. So we identified 2 threatening dynamics, mainly secular intolerance and Islamic oppression. So first of all, what is secular intolerance and what do we mean by that? With secular intolerance, we mean the growing secularization of the public sphere that is driven by a radical and ideological form of secularism, which relegates religion to the private sphere only. It should also not be confused with secularity, which has to be mentioned that is nothing bad in particular, but is actually just guaranteeing the neutrality of the state towards religion. The second dynamic is Islamic oppression, and is a very particular one. It's particular because it only affects a small group of Christians, so mainly Christian converts, and it happens mostly in what we termed hotspot areas, where militant and extremist teachings of Islam infiltrated the community life. So to some extent, yes, also other Christians living in these areas also face intolerance and feel threatened sometimes, as some of our interviewees stated that they would not want to wear a cross in the neighborhood, as if this could cause some negative attention. So additionally to these two dynamics, we have also identified 4 areas of life that are mainly affected. So this is church life, education, politics, and the workplace. Additionally to that, there's also 6 human rights of Christians that are mostly affected, which is freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, parental rights, and contractual freedom. Now I would like to go into the very specific details of the report so that you can actually really get a look into the reality that we see every day. I will start out with the topic on freedom of speech. So when it comes to freedom of speech of Christians, all 5 countries have a problem, but due to different reasons. So for example, in Germany, renowned journalist Birgit Keller was without any warning or explanation deleted by Spotify because she featured in a podcast where she critically assessed gender theory, which she also wrote a book about just before that. Another example is a midwifery student in the UK. Her name is Julia Rinkovic. I hope I pronounced the name correctly. And she was suspended from university for over 4 months. And also her fitness to practice was investigated simply because she was involved with a pro-life society. Another very shocking story is the one which will be told after me by Father Bernard Randall, which is really a very tragic, but very exemplifying story of what we are dealing with here. So the most visible problem with freedom of speech currently occurs in the UK because of the high number of criminal charges and job dismissals. And in other countries, it is rather seen that there is less cases or public cases because the self-censorship rate is higher, which is also due to cultural and historical reasons. Unfortunately, I will not be able to talk about all the listed freedoms or topic of the report today, but one that is really current one that we're all concerned with is the one of religious freedom in connection to the COVID-19 pandemic. So the COVID-19 pandemic and the emergency regulations that follow it restricted the religious freedom of many Christians. Except for Spain, all other countries immediately put a ban on worship, at least in the first lockdown, because they essentially didn't see it as a vital need or service. So in detail, part of the UK and France only lifted the ban because the court intervened and overruled the disproportionate regulations by the government. So mainly because other shops and restaurants were already allowed to be opened, but not the church, which very much raised the demand for proportionality, as you can see here. Although Spain did not close down the churches, the police unjustifiably raided churches that were acting within the legal regulations. We have seen many cases of that. Another good example of those from this year is that an annual Catholic procession was prohibited in March 2021, while feminist marches on the 8th of May were allowed. So I think these examples show how quick governments are to restrict religious freedom, and that there might be a bias or at least some sort of religious illiteracy. So coming to the problem of Christian converts with a Muslim background, Christian converts have severe difficulties in all the observed countries. They mainly face two problems. So it's either connected to their families and the wider community, if they're living in certain hotspot areas. But it is also when they're seeking for asylum that they are discriminated against by the state due to religious illiteracy. I would like to read out to you some examples now, so you get a better picture of what those people are facing. So the first example is from Germany. There, an Iranian Christian woman known as Masha, so her name was changed, who fled Iran and immigrated to Germany in 2015 after the police attempted to arrest her for her conversion to Christianity, which under Sharia law is considered blasphemy and treason and punishable with death. She feared for her life if returned to Iran. Masha was living in Hesse, but a decision in 2019 by the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees denied her asylum, causing her severe distress and anxiety. After a petition was signed by 7,860 people asking the authorities to grant her asylum, which was also promoted by her Christian community, Masha was given a refugee status and was able to stay in Germany. Another example from Sweden reads, a young 27-year-old Iranian woman with 2 children converted to Christianity in 2019, but has experienced continual and growing threats, abuse and harassment from her family, including her husband. She has since been living in hidden accommodation. The last example is from one of our interviews, and it states, in the asylum camp, some of our converts who were reading the Bible got very big problems. It was in Hotel John in Philippsstad. One day when I passed through the camp, I saw policemen and a big crowd of angry people. Some families came to me and were very upset. They told me that they had been threatened when they read the Bible in their rooms. In the night, strong Muslims at the camp entered their rooms without knocking, and if they saw people reading the Bible, they hit them and told them that later at night they were going to cut their heads. I think it is important, although it is shocking, to mention that this only happens to a very small minority of Christians in very specific areas in those countries. But nevertheless, it should and cannot be ignored by the government. Those people need protection. So coming to the next and last unpleasant topic, where we have a big problem, and that is hate crimes. So especially in France and Germany, we have a problem there. So the French government statistics from 2019 say that on average, almost 3 cases of vandalism against a church or a Christian building happens every day. We see all kinds of anti-Christian hate crimes. It ranges from vandalism, arson, desecration, threats, and in very, very rare cases, even physical violence or killings. It can also be said that the biggest majority of hate crimes are vandalism against buildings. And some might say that that's not really a big deal, but we would argue that there is a good reason why the OSCE and academic research considers it a serious hate crime. First of all, vandalism and theft in churches also leads to a limitation of freedom of religion, because many churches have to close during the day out of security reasons, and believers can't have free access to prayer anymore. And secondly, hate crimes should not be underestimated because they have a high signaling power that can lead to intimidation. I mean, that's the intention of it anyway. And additionally, the public visibility of violence against churches somehow normalizes violence against Christians in the public sphere. In the end, the monitoring of hate crimes is an important barometer for the social climate in a given country. And according to the latest research by the Pew Research Center, social hostilities against religious people have risen. But Professor Pollack will further extend on it later on. Well, unfortunately, we're limited in time today. I would have loved to tell you a lot more about the findings of our report, but I can highly recommend you to read the whole report because there are numerous various illustrative and real life examples in there. And you can always go on our website, intoleranceagainstchristians.edu, and search in our archives for all the cases that we have collected so far. So thank you for your attention, and I give back to Martin.
Thank you, Madeleine. Okay, sorry, I think there was a difficulty. Thank you, Madeleine. I just wanted to add one figure which might be interesting for you. Anti-Christian hate crimes in Europe increased by 70% between 2019 and 20, which is the space of our report's research. So our next speaker, our special guest from England, from the United Kingdom, is Pastor Dr. Bernard Randall. Thank you so much for joining us. Pastor Randall is now a former school chaplain, we have to say, at Trent College in Nottingham, UK. And we invited him to tell us his personal story that happened last May when he defended pupils' rights to question schools' introduction to the new LGBT policies in his region or in his country. Father Bernard, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me. Thank you to the Observatory for highlighting my story, which I guess is a fairly shocking example, but only one example amongst a great many, as the report highlights. So it's a longish story, but I'll keep it as brief as I can in summary. Story goes back to 2018 when the school where I was working as chaplain, a Christian school. My job as the chaplain was, amongst other things, to be the particular voice of Christian values in the school, as you might very well expect. And as an ordained person, that's fairly obviously what I would be doing. The school invited in a group called Educate and Celebrate, which aims to, on a surface, it says it's about anti-bullying in terms of LGBT issues, but it also aims to embed gender and gender identity into the whole life of the school, which is a little bit beyond simply anti-bullying. And they came and did some staff training. And as part of the staff training, they highlighted important things about, preventing bullying and making sure that different areas of life were seen in examples in classes and whatever, and none of the things that anyone would object to. But then it went a bit further, and at one point the leader of the training had the staff chanting about the need to smash heteronormativity. And heteronormativity is the idea that there are male and female, and that's the basic defining set of humanity. That's the normal way of humans, and that the male-female pair bond is a normal part of the way that human societies are structured. And the idea of smashing this is to say that these distinctions should be completely destroyed, which goes quite a long way beyond saying don't bully people for who they are. And certainly, as far as I can see, Christian beliefs are broadly heteronormative, as well as biology and just the real world points us in that direction. So after this training, I went to the school leadership and I said, well, look, there are aspects of this that are absolutely fine, but there are some areas where Christians might be uneasy, might disagree. So can we have a conversation about what is and isn't put in place in the school? And they said, absolutely, yes, no problem, we'll do that. And then a few months later, I was told, oh no, we're doing the whole thing. And there had been no consultation, no discussion. I had simply been excluded. And then I said, hang on, what's going on here? They said, oh, we didn't include you in the discussions because we thought you might disagree, which was rather odd, I thought. A school chaplain trying to say, let's think about the Christian values of the school, is excluded deliberately from that conversation. So across the course of the year, I picked up from staff and pupils in the school a certain amount of unease about the sort of political agenda that was going on behind some of what was happening, until a pupil said to me in the summer term 2019, how come we're told we have to accept all this LGBT stuff in a Christian school? And I thought that was a really interesting way of putting the question. How come we're told we have to accept? And he said, can you talk about that in a sermon in chapel? And I thought, well, yeah, that's absolutely fair enough. And every summer term, I always try to take topics from pupils. So I gave that sermon, and the sermon is available to read online in various places. The easiest place to find it probably would be via christianconcern.com/Bernard, which gives links to the sermon and links through to various information about my case as well. So you can find it, you can read it for yourselves to judge what I said. But essentially what I said was, it's really important we respect people we disagree with. When there are ideological differences of belief, respect the people you disagree with, but loving your neighbor as yourself doesn't mean you have to agree with people. It means respect them. No excuse for personal attacks, no excuse for abuse. Nobody should be discriminated against. But where there are differences, make up your own mind. That was a really key part of what I was saying. And as examples, I said, you may believe that the Christian understanding of marriage of one man, one woman is correct. You may believe that biological sex is real and sometimes makes a difference, though often it doesn't. And you may look at the language around gender identity and think that it's incoherent, doesn't quite make sense, and therefore question what's going on with that. You may do all those things, but if you accept all the LGBT ideology, along with the basics of non-discrimination, if you accept the ideology, that's absolutely fine too. So I was saying, respect people, make up your own minds. And for doing this, the school leadership hauled me into a meeting and basically an interrogation. What on earth do you think you're doing? And I was suspended from my job and reported to the police under the British government's anti-terrorism strategy. So I was reported as a potential terrorist for saying you may believe ordinary Christian and philosophical beliefs and respect the people you disagree with. And that's a really important thing. And that was terrifying for me. I only found out because in the course of the disciplinary proceedings, I was given some papers which mentioned in passing that they'd done this. And then when I read that, I had visions of the police breaking down the door at 6 o'clock in the morning and dragging me away and seizing all the computers and phones in the house. And I had no idea what might happen. And it was only afterwards that the school said to me, oh yes, the report, the police said it didn't meet the threshold for terrorism, which is no great surprise. But the police officer had said it was inappropriate in society to be saying these things, which shows not only the intolerance of these ideas within the school leadership, even within what's supposed to be a Christian school, but intolerance amongst the police force. And what on earth are the police doing saying that a respectful presentation of Christian values is unacceptable in society? So I was disciplined and I was sacked for gross misconduct, for doing my job, for simply doing my job as far as I could see. They said that people had been offended, but they couldn't really point to anything that was actually offensive in what I said. As I say, you can read it and judge for yourselves if you want to. I appealed and I was reinstated by the governors because I think they recognised that the process followed hadn't been fair. But I had a lot of conditions placed upon me, which included censorship of all my sermons. They had to be pre-approved by a member of the senior leadership team, which made my life really difficult. I wasn't really allowed to speak to pupils, and previously I'd been teaching as well, and they refused to let me teach. And the idea that a Christian person might be allowed to speak to the peoples freely and openly simply wasn't acceptable to them. And that's the sort of depth of that extreme secularist intolerance that I was having to face. And then COVID hit and I was furloughed. So despite this time of real crisis of moral and spiritual, psychological concerns, they said, no, we don't need a chaplain at this time. We don't need his input. We'll furlough him. And then they used the excuse of the loss of revenue over COVID to get rid of me, to make me redundant. So I lost my job at the end of 2020. And then this became public because there was supposed to be an employment tribunal, a court case, because I was claiming religious discrimination against the school and unfair dismissal. The idea that a Christian chaplain should be suing a Christian school for religious discrimination against Christians, that shows you, I think, quite how far the extreme secularism can be taken by some people. That's where they want to end up, the absolute silencing of Christian beliefs that don't fit with their very, very strong ideology. Court case was supposed to be in June last year, but unfortunately the school's lawyers, June this year, the school's lawyers didn't manage to get the paperwork sorted out in time, despite having lots of warning. And the judge had to put the case back to September of next year. So I will have been a year and 3/4 from losing my job to even being able to get it to court. But of course, that doesn't account for the longer period where I was put under this intolerable pressure. And has been said to me by various people that the process is the punishment. The fact that I've been put through this, I haven't been able to get work in ministry. There's no prospect probably they'll ever work in school again because of what they've done. They don't want Christian voices, and even moderate Christian voices such as my own. I fully recognize that there are different points of view and people are entitled to hold them. But amongst those points of view is the Christian point of view, the traditional Christian understanding of who we are as human beings, and that should be allowed too. So I think my story points to sort of, as it were, the slippery slope. If we don't protect freedoms, all freedoms, but particularly religious freedom, the freedom to speak and to share one's faith and to discuss it openly, if we don't protect that, then the increasing intolerance, the increasing discrimination, what I suffered, a chaplain in a school chapel in an act of worship saying these Christian ideas are okay, that will be deemed so unacceptable that people will lose their jobs and their livelihoods and the mental and physical health implications that you suffer when you go through that sort of process. So, don't let this sort of intolerance continue, because in 5-10 years time, what I experienced, extreme now, potentially could become quite normal and standard. And that's why the work of the Observatory, the work of Christian Concern, who are the organisation supporting me in Britain, and also the Free Speech Union, of which I'm a member in Britain, that stands up for the freedom of all people, religious and non-religious. And there are organisations, but they need every bit of help they can get if we want real freedoms to continue in our society. So that's my story in brief. And I dare say if there are questions later, I might come back to more details, but I hope that gives you a sense of exactly what we're facing.
Thank you so much, Father Bernhard. I have to say that this testimonial is really shocking, even for me, who has heard and listened to a lot of stories about discrimination against Christians. Thanks again for completing our picture here about secularism and the challenges Christians face nowadays in Europe. Our next speaker is, so to say, our special guest from Austria. Professor Dr. Regina Pollack, and she is at the same time an academic expert and a diplomatic expert for our topic. Professor Pollack is an outstanding scholar of sociology of religion at the University of Vienna. She is head of the Department of Practical Theology at the Catholic Theological Faculty. And since 2020, she has held the position of a special representative for combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in the OSCE. It's a big area, as you can see in the long title, but she has to cover at the same time a focus on intolerance and discrimination against Christians and members of other religions. So it's a special honor for us, and I thank Professor Pollack to take the floor now.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this press conference to point out a problem that will require more attention at national and international level in the future. The increasing number of reported hate crimes against Christians, as well as the restrictions regarding the freedom of religion or belief, as documented in the OSCE and ODIHR's most recent hate crime reports in the wake of the pandemic, is worrying. However, it is a problem of a complex nature. On the one hand, the number of hate crimes might be even higher, as a quarter of the OSCE states do not report hate crimes at all, and therefore leave them invisible and unaddressed. On the other hand, many states do not have a definition or jurisprudence regarding hate crimes that corresponds with the OSCE commitments. For instance, hate crime data recorded by the police in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland represent public order offenses, some of which fall outside of the OSCE's definition of hate crime. Also, the number of states reporting hate crimes increased between 2019 and 2020, which also explains the increase. So from an OSCE perspective, and that is the perspective I'm talking about, we must interpret the data very carefully to get a precise picture of the situation and to tackle the problems in a differentiated way. If you want to know more details, please refer to the website of the OSCE. It gives you an impressive overview about the developments. Additionally, the ways in which discrimination against Christians can currently be observed in the OSCE regions are of different types and accordingly require country-specific and appropriate measures. Hate crimes are clearly defined by the OSCE. Hate crimes are criminal acts motivated by bias or prejudice towards particular groups of people. They comprise two elements, a criminal offense and a bias motivation. Besides ethnic and religious groups and minorities, Jews, Muslims, people of diverse gender identities, Roma and Sinti, and other vulnerable groups, Christians are the targets of hate crimes across the OSCE regions. These incidents, anti-Christian hate crimes, are influenced by a number of factors, including, for instance, the minority or majority status in the given territory, the level of recognition of particular religious groups in a given country, or political and media focus on these groups at a particular moment. ODIHR's hate crime reporting includes reports of physical assaults and murders that indicate that in particular Jehovah's Witnesses are particularly at risk. Reports also indicated that graffiti and vandalism against places of worship, the desecration of cemeteries, and arson attacks against churches are some of the more common types of crimes motivated by bias against Christians. ODIHR, the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, has published a folder to support the identification and reporting of anti-Christian hate crimes, and also regularly offers seminars and webinars that support multipliers in their work against such crimes. I can only warmly recommend this support, especially since the cooperation with ODIHR also opens up valuable international networking opportunities that are urgently needed, because combating hate crimes against Christians and human beings is a common and a comprehensive task. The challenge becomes more complex when it comes to the OSCE's international engagements against anti-Christian discrimination. The OSCE participating states have made numerous commitments to combat racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, discrimination, and intolerance, with a special focus on intolerance and discrimination against Christian, Jews, and Muslims, and members of other religions. As this is a comprehensive approach, as you see, and as part of this comprehensive approach to promote tolerance and non-discrimination, the focus of which is the protection of human rights of the individual, and in particular the freedom of religion or belief, the OSCE first condemned intolerance and discrimination against Christians in Cordoba 2005, and also recognized it as a unique phenomenon. Since then, several decisions have been published by the Ministerial Council, which have led to the development of appropriate measures in recent years. The participating states and their governments, as well as political and parliamentary representatives, are required to implement these commitments. They include promoting awareness-raising measures of anti-Christian discrimination within the framework of a comprehensive access to intolerance and discrimination. Furthermore, states and governments shall reject manifestations of discrimination and intolerance clearly and protect affected persons or groups from attacks based on their religious affiliation. They are also required to ensure that religious sites, buildings, and cemeteries are respected and protected from vandalism. Last but not least, the development of appropriate training and educational measures is also addressed. Regarding Christians, there is still a lot to be done. First, in some OSCE states, it is necessary to sensitize people to the reality of anti-Christian hate crimes and discrimination. Nonetheless, and now I'm speaking as a scientist, the consistent implementation of these measures is combined with some challenges. For the European context, appropriate research is urgently needed since the forms and causes of anti-Christian hate crimes and discrimination are quite diverse in different countries and are not well researched. New phenomena are emerging in Europe because of both a progressive secularism and a religiously motivated political extremism from the Islamistic side. Simultaneously, also Jews and Muslims experience hate speech and discrimination in a worrying way, which must be seen in the greater context of the changing and hotly debated role of religion in the OSCE region and the transformation of values. Transformations that do not allow rapid judgments, but also need research and public debates. Last but not least, the difficulties and dangers that Muslim asylum seekers who have converted to Christianity face, both from the state side and from the side of fundamentalist Muslims in some European countries, must be mentioned. From the OSCE perspective, the decisive question is whether and to what extent human rights, in particular the right to freedom or religion or belief, is violated. Not any kind of criticism of Christians is equal with discrimination or can be considered as a violation of the freedom of religion and belief. Additionally, the necessary engagement against anti-Christian discrimination and hate crimes is made more difficult by the politicization of the issue as we can observe it in Europe. Between right-wing populist parties instrumentalizing the victims for political interests, especially in the context of European migration and Islam policy, and the refusal to perceive and tackle the problem on parts of the left political side, an objective and, above all, a solution-oriented discussion has become very difficult. It is the victims who pay the price for this politicization. What can be done? With regard to hate crimes, it is necessary to raise awareness and encourage those affected to report such incidents. Therefore, countries should improve the mechanism they use to record hate crimes and collect data. They also need to do more to raise awareness about the special nature of hate crimes. This includes increasing the capacities of criminal justice officials to recognize, record, investigate, and prosecute hate crimes effectively. To ensure that victims are protected, enjoy full access to justice, and receive tailored specialist support, countries also need to strengthen their victim support systems and work closely with civil society organizations, which often offer the most specialized and direct support to those who have become the target of hate crime. ODIHR offers participating states a range of resources and tools to help them meet hate crime victims' needs, improve hate crime monitoring and recording practices, and strengthen cooperation with civil society. Let me come to the end. ODIHR also recommends the so-called coalition building of civil society groups, that is the institutionalized establishment of cooperative religious and civil society groups which work together to protect the freedom of religion or belief and take measures against discrimination. Coalitions of this kind provide lasting protection even in the event of a conflict or a crisis, because they make people aware of the common responsibility for tolerance and non-discrimination. Thus, combating intolerance and discrimination against Christians and promoting tolerance and peace can be part of a comprehensive engagement together with other civil society organizations. The OSCE, in particular ODIHR, stands ready to support. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Pollack, for sharing your expertise with us and for giving a very good overview about the problems of hate speech and hate crimes, first of all, hate crimes in Europe. Thank you also for addressing the problem of politicization and for your recommendations. As a last speaker today, I welcome Dr. Felix Böllmann. He is a German lawyer working now in Vienna as a legal counselor for ADF, which is the International Alliance Defending Freedom, as a human rights organization which advocates for religious freedom worldwide and provides legal support for victims of faith-based discrimination. Among other topics, Felix is an expert on anti-discrimination laws, on freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Thank you, Felix, for talking to us.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here today. And first and foremost, I would like to commend the Observatory of Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe, namely Martin Kugler and Madeleine Enzensberger and their entire team, for continuously documenting incidents and so many individual cases, and also for accomplishing the tremendous work of putting together a comprehensive and nuanced, I shall say, report on what is indeed a complex subject. I do not want to repeat what my esteemed fellow panelists already said, so I will deviate a little bit from my script and just highlight a few points in law. One might think that here in Western Europe, we are extremely privileged. We have a stable legal environment. There are functioning legal institutions. There's generally respect for human rights and the rule of law. Nevertheless, quite sadly, the instant report that we're discussing today is an aggregate of incidents that should not be happening. And indeed, while on the whole, we're a long way from very real and frequent dangers for life and limb, which other Christians or other minorities might experience in other parts of the world, persecution starts little by little. And the stories that we heard today by Madeleine Enzensberger and also by Dr. Randall illustrate the extent to what we've come to and how things are rapidly changing. And unfortunately, I shall say that my profession and the law plays a role in that. And this is what I would like to highlight today in the relatively short time. I would like to first talk a little bit about the concept of hate crime and really any laws concerning the content of expression. Secondly, I would like to highlight a few aspects of equality and non-discrimination laws. And last but not least, some remarks on other laws that bring with them a chilling effect, especially on Christians. Let's begin with the issue of hate crimes. To be very clear, I do welcome the OSCE's efforts to collect these data, just as I very much welcome the observatory to collect the incidents. Is very important, as these things usually go escape the attention of the general public, and therefore it is a very honorable task to collect these incidents. But at the same time, from a legal standpoint, the concept of hate crime is not without problems of its own. And I would like to explain briefly why I say that. Professor Pollack pointed out that by definition used by the OSCE, hate crime is a criminal offense plus bias motivation. Together, these two aspects make for hate crime. Now, from a legal standpoint, while that will certainly help to discern motives, motives are probably not what a criminal offense or the assessment of a criminal offense should be based on, unless there are very rare circumstances prescribed by law. As we all know, criminal law must be very strict and must be previously known in writing and cannot be made up on the go. And here's where the term hate crime is problematic. Legally speaking, at best, is an unnecessary category because by definition, it already requires a criminal offense, which means the act that we're discussing would already be punishable under existing law. Adding the motive here helps us to understand what's going on in society, and that is indeed an honorable trait, but legally is highly problematic. Why is that? Well, a state that respects individual freedom can hardly task itself with judging someone's attitudes, unless it was immediately geared, of course, to incite violence or other tangible outside effects. To put it more drastically, enforcing a rule for someone to be good is not for the state. Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde, a former German federal constitutional judge, more than 50 years ago, put it by way of a dilemma. He said that the liberal secularized state lives by prerequisites which it cannot guarantee itself. In other words, the state, the free state, requires other institutions to inform people to know what is good and what is bad. It cannot tell that to people, and that's the concept of neutrality when it comes to religion or belief. And I strongly feel that the principle of neutrality must be respected. Otherwise, we wade into the territory that Dr. Randall described very, very dramatically in what happened to him. That is when all of a sudden the state starts to inform people what to think. And that is problematic because it deviates from what we understand to be the human rights principles. A similar problem, for example, and that's also mentioned in the report, is the German Network Enforcement Act. It is content-based censorship, which the state cannot do under the German constitution. So in order to come to terms with what is indeed growing hatred in the internet, they force private corporation to discern the content and to take it off the net. Now, in itself, I understand that is an honorable motivation to do that because we must not permit hatred to dwell. But is it for the state? And if the constitution tells us that there shall be no censorship, can the state then force others by imposing fines if they don't to do that in its stead? I find that legally very problematic. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should let all these things just grow, but we need to be very careful when it comes to the law to not create a fuzziness around the edges of what is already existing regulation and open the field to a very subjective approach to offense. And I want to highlight that with an example from the UK, where currently a police crime sentencing and courts bill is under debate in the House of Lords. And if that came into force, it would give police broad powers to impose conditions or arrest people if their public expression causes serious unease, alarm, or distress, or even inconvenience to bystanders. These are the words from the bill currently debated. Now, I'd like to remind you that less than 50 years ago, in the decision of Handyside versus the UK, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg said that freedom of expression is applicable not only to information or ideas that are favorably received or regarded as inoffensive or as a matter of indifference, but also to those that offend, shock, or disturb the state or any sector of the population. That was in 1976. And I was quoting the original decision from the European Court of Human Rights. And by contrast, if you see the police crime sentencing and court bill now, a single police officer will have the discretion to discern whether an act by someone, like a street preacher, for example, causes serious unease, alarm, or distress, or inconvenience to bystanders. I don't think the contrast of these two approaches to the topic can be much more highlighted here. And unfortunately, there's a track record that offences under the Public Order Act 1986 in the UK, with very good motivation to introduce such an act, have ultimately led to some random pensioner, to some street preacher being arrested for doing no more than basically reading from the Bible in public. Similar laws in Finland caused the former Minister of the Interior and the parliamentary deputy, Dr. Päivi Räsänen, to be on trial for hate crime for tweeting a Bible verse. So this is just to illustrate where this can go if we are not very, very careful with the law, and that's all I mean to say. We need to stick with legal methodology when it comes to making these criminal assessments. The rest is the space of sociology, and that's great, and that's very important to understand what's going on in the society, but we must not confuse that with a call for punishment. Secondly, I would like to briefly mention some national laws that have been enacted in compliance with the standards of the EU equal treatment and non-discrimination directives. There have been several over time, and they have been implemented in national law. As a result, for example, in labor law, we see the number of prohibited grounds for discrimination growing. We see so-called protected classes, including matters which are hard to balance. And I just want to give you one example. In the German general anti-discrimination law, it's prohibited to discriminate on the grounds of, among others, religion or worldview, but also on the ground of sexual identity. Now, what is sexual identity is a very complex thing to understand. The word identity gives it away. It has to do with the perceptions of an individual, and it has certainly a subjective element. These two may easily conflict if we accept that a religious view or a worldview can inform a person's stance on sexual identity, like Dr. Randall was mentioning earlier. For sure, the mere fact that there may be conflict does not mean this conflict cannot be resolved in the area of law. But in a varying number of cases, we see such provisions either being applied very selectively or not being properly reasoned by authorities. In constitutional law, in a situation of conflict of competing rights of equal level, one right would not simply trump the other. Rather, ways would need to be found to allow the conflicting rights to be as effective as can be. And for the same reason, a common misunderstanding should be avoided. Equality rights originally seek to protect against arbitrary application of the law based on irrelevant criteria. To put it in very simple terms, equality before the law means that the law is equally applicable to everyone, whether it be the Queen, the President, or any ordinary person. But over the past years, we see this concept to be moving towards a much broader understanding of equality, basically equity, really. And the role of the state then also changes from being an arbiter towards being a reallocator of substantial resources, sometimes based on group status. The principle of neutrality then is much harder to maintain, but it's the state's job to stay neutral in questions of belief and worldview. So equality and non-discrimination really cannot be one-way streets, and intolerance in the name of tolerance should definitely be put to a legal test. Yes, there are boundaries, but there's also legal methodology to deal with that, and that should be applied carefully. As a third and last point, I would like to touch upon other laws having a chilling effect on the area we're discussing today. I would like to mention, for example, campus groups' access to rooms or space or even funding on campus. It used to be fairly easy to just get together with a few students who thought similarly and institute a campus group and then have a room and have a weekly meeting. That was also true for religious groups, of course. But as of late, for example, the University of Mainz in Germany has introduced a law that makes religion sound a little bit suspicious and something to rather stay out of. Clearly not a call for a university to make. There is a law that says that the goal of such a university group cannot predominantly be to pursue the common practice of religion or worldview. Now, if you think back to your student days, what did you do? You sat around with people and you tried to understand the world around you, applying all the techniques that you learned in academia. And there were heated debates about literally God and the world, as we say in Germany. And that should now be prohibited. Where will that lead us? Will we still be able to engage in dialogue with one another, even if we have competing views? The problem with this kind of law and regulation is that it sends the message that religion is fine as long as it's private. But religion is not really private, because religious people are called to practice their religion by the way they conduct themselves in everyday life. Yes, they're subject to criminal law. So if you believe that your religion leads you to do anything that is punishable as a criminal offense, you will certainly feel the power of the state. And that's absolutely correct. There are limits how we can live in society, but religion is all but private. Returning to the beginning, when I said, citing Ernst Wolfgang Böckenförde, that the state cannot guarantee the precondition on which it lives, religion could be something to give people this guidance, this North Star, to inform them what is good and what is bad, what the state cannot do. And therefore, making religion an entirely private thing is probably not in the best interest of the state, something to consider. In conclusion, I would like to once more commend the authors of the Instant Report for a very accessible document with clear methodology, transparency, even with regard to certain limitations. I think that's a sign of excellence to admit when you don't know something. And it's really, we're in this together, and it's wonderful to hear a plurality of voices and together to be after truth. In its entirety, the report helps to see where laws play an at least ambiguous role and therefore mandate caution. I'm very happy to be available for any questions if you have any. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Böllmann. I'm sure that there will be interesting questions, and I'm happy that you are here, not only for giving this deep analysis and insight, which you actually are able to give as a lawyer, and to be so familiar with all these challenges, but also because we have now our question and answer session, and I would invite you, dear colleagues and journalists, to digitally raise your hands and be then invited to unmute your voice or your microphone and ask questions. If you want, of course, you might indicate the person or to whom you ask the question. And if possible, please mention your name and the media outlet you work for. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah.
So there's two rather technical questions from the chat that we can start with. The first one is from Daniela Stetter, and it's the question is, as you said, anti-Christian hate crimes in Europe increased by 70% between 2019 and 2020. Is there an absolute number you can give? Yes. So in 2019, we had an absolute number of 578 cases across the OSCE region, which unfortunately rose to a total number of 981 cases for the year 2020. Yeah, so that's the answer to the first question. So the second question is from Helena Darcy from Sweden, and it says, when are you going to release the complete report for 2020? It is going to be released today on our website. You can go on intoleranceagainstchristians.eu, and there you will find a link to publications where you will find the full report for 2020, around 60 pages. But then we also have 4 shorter versions, which is also available in French, Spanish, and German.
Is there any question for now? The communication is not so easy here. It would be better to be in a real press conference, but Pamela, is there any? So
yeah, one more question from Germany. Yeah. I'm working for an evangelical news agency here. Thank you for the report and the press conference. There was a lot of information. You said you have identified 5 European countries: France, Germany, Spain, Sweden, and the UK. Why those 5? The institute is based in Austria. Some of you live in Austria. What is the difference between Germany and Austria?
I will try to answer this question. I would say why we chose those 5 is because, as I said, while going through our data in the archive, but also when we conducted the research, we saw that the biggest problems are currently in those 5 countries. Although, as mentioned before, we don't have an insight into every detail and into all countries, so it is preliminary. So all the cases that we looked at, and also where we could find data, we saw that those 5 countries are currently the most difficult for Christians to live in. So that also goes into the second one. There are not as many problems at the moment, fortunately, in Austria as they are in Germany, especially when it also comes to vandalism and hate crimes. That was also a big surprise for us, that there is actually a quite high number of anti-Christian hate crimes in the form mostly of vandalism, but also arson. So in terms of cases, Germany follows directly after France. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Is there another question? We kind of...
Yes, hello.
Yeah.
Here
hello.
is Andreas Mittendorfer from Austrian Radio. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
Very good. Hello.
Just an additional question to Madeleine Enzelberger, as you reported just before. I just wanted to know what are the main problems in these 5 countries, just in a very short overview in these 5 countries, in discrimination and intolerance against Christian. Could you give a very short overview?
Yes, of course, I'd love to. So they're very diverse. However, one of the biggest problems is with the limitation of freedom of speech. This includes various areas of life. Could be the workplace, education, as in university and schools. So the very crucial area, but then we also have the problem with freedom of conscience, where we constantly have a push from rather ideological movements to get rid of the conscientious objection clause for medical staff, especially when it comes to procedures of abortion. So there's a push for that currently, especially in Spain, but there was also one in France. And then the next area is freedom of religion, as I outlined with the COVID-19 pandemic. This has been not just a European phenomenon, but around the world, unfortunately. And the last one I would say is definitely also parental rights, where we see that with new school policies on sex and relationship education, often parents' rights are ignored. Yeah.
May I add something? Because
yes,
according to the definition of hate crimes of the OSCE, there is a little difference of what is perceived in our reports than in this report presented here. I invite you to look at the homepage where you can see all the different incidents, because the main problem, according to the OSCE definition, is the criminal aspect of it. Yeah, I'm aware of the legal problem, Mr. Böllmann, but however, the OSCE needs to have common definitions within the framework of the tolerance and non-discrimination aspect. Yeah, this is the reason why the two of us might not agree, because if you put it the other way around, you would have a lot of political problems. As you can imagine, as all these debates, of course, take place within the OSCE. But yes, I want to stress the fact that the difference between the definitions also makes a difference between the perception of what is anti-Christian hate crime and anti-Christian discrimination. And this is why I stress very much the necessity to have debates on this and to make research on this, because like it is with defining anti-Semitism, where there is a lot of academic discussion, what is anti-Semitism? Yeah? I mean, many states already have accepted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism in the meanwhile, but in the academic realm, you have still hot debates, what can be considered anti-Semitism and what is not. The same is with anti-Muslim racism or hostility against Muslims. The debates on this. And the same issue we have with what is anti-Christian discrimination and anti-Christian hate crime. And on this issue, on the anti-Christian issue, I think we need more debates, more research to come to perspectives that support the victims. This is the most important issue, I think. Yeah. Because of this, the whole issue is not only politicized, it's also religionized. You mentioned the changing, the transformation of the role of religion in society. This is also a very ambivalent and multidimensional aspect, because on the one side, you have the privatization of religion, as you said, but at the same time, you also have a growing interest of religion, especially in Western European countries where governments realize that religious communities and religious leaders are important partners for debates. I visited, I think, 3 conferences the last year where this was a very important issue. How can we cooperate with religious communities and leaders? Of course, it's from the political side, the interest is how can religious partners help to implement and raise awareness for human rights issues. These are very diverse developments, and the third dimension of this transformation of religion is the politicization of religion as such. Yeah? Because of the disembedding of religiosity and the decrease of religious attitudes in Europe, as we can see, for instance, in the European Value Study, religion has become a kind of an identity politics issue. Yeah? So there are very diverse developments within society, within religious communities, within politics, and we have to understand also this anti-Christian discrimination issue within these developments, and there is actually there is a lack of knowledge on it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just want to make it clear that what my colleague Madeleine mentioned was, of course, not only hate crimes as the OSCE would define it, but also breaches of freedom. So that all the examples about discrimination is, of course, not ipso facto covered by the OSCE hate crime report. This is fully understandable. Dr. Böllmann, would you like to add anything because you were addressed, or are you?
Just very briefly.
Yeah.
This is why I really appreciate occasions such as this, because we get some insights from very different angles. And I did not mean to say anything to challenge what Professor Pollack just highlighted. All I meant to say is that as a legal category, hate crime is very problematic there's many aspects where it can add to the debate, and I can clearly appreciate the reason why the OSCE is doing that, and I do want to make it clear that I'm not criticizing that approach at all. All I meant to say is that we do not want to transform that into law to give a reason for criminalization of certain acts, because I feel it doesn't really add anything to the already existing legal methodology that is in place. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Böllmann. And now there's another question from Sweden, I think. Miss Tarsi, I think you raised your hand. Yeah?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yes, please go ahead.
Just a question from Katolsk Magazine, in Sweden, just to make sure I'm getting this right. So your report is based on the OSCE numbers to which you have added breaches of freedom. Am I correct?
So yes, we have the OSCE data, but the thing is that the big majority of the OSCE data on anti-Christian hate crimes comes from the observatory. So I think that's also an important number to know. If you look at the number of civil society organizations actually contributing data to the OSCE, which is a total number of 136, there's only 8 organizations that are constantly reporting anti-Christian hate crimes. And out of the 981 cases that have been reported for 2020, the observatory gave 600 cases to the OSCE. So it is only part of our data. It is very legitimate data, and as it is also stated in the report, our definition of hate crime is the same as it is for the OSCE. So the rest is not considered a hate crime, but discrimination on different grounds concerning different freedoms.
Thank you. Just one additional question. You mentioned before questionnaires with 144 questions going out to the various countries. How many, roughly or approximately? Because I'm intrigued that Sweden was selected as one of these 5 focus countries, and I think it's very good, but I'm still puzzled and intrigued. Do you know how roughly or how many questionnaires were sent to Sweden?
Mm-hmm. So you mean the number of people that we sent it to in Sweden?
Yeah, and perhaps also the number of people who responded.
Okay, yeah. So the number of people that responded, I don't know the exact number for Sweden, but it's usually around 15 people. And that includes experts in different fields, but then also lay people, and of course, which is a hard thing, to also get some converts to fill out the questionnaires on their situation.
Thank you.
Can I add something? I put the link for Austria here in the chat box. And if you open it, you can see how necessary it is to deal precisely with the data, and really for each country to look how does this country define hate crimes. And in the case of Austria, you can see that the Austrian hate crimes law are a combination of a general penalty enhancement provision and a substantive offense. That means another issue is that the data reported to ODIHR do not present cases of hate crime and hate speech separately. And also the police recorded hate crime data include right-wing extremism and neo-Nazi crimes. That means you really have to look at each case. And the OSCE website makes it possible. Yes, you can really look at each single case, what has happened. This is really helpful, and you can make it for all the countries that have reported hate crimes. And the work of the ODIHR is to differentiate it and look at how does it suit to the OSCE definition, because we can only work within our mandates that have been given to us by 57 states. To make this clear.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was
Complex
this is-
issue, and for
Yeah.
this it needs much more attention to look carefully, but to raise awareness for it.
Thank you very much for this contribution. This is very appreciated. I think we already are in time, or how do you say, we should respect your schedules as media journalists, and we have to come to an end. Please use our website for further research. As Madeleine mentioned, we have 4,000 cases available, and our search machine or search function gives a lot of criteria which might help you to do detailed research and get more information. And our report will be available in the full text in the section of publications. By the way, we are here ready to respond your questions during the day by email if you have any additional requests. And in any case, we hope to stay in touch. We have a monthly newsletter which can provide you with information during the year. And yeah, I want to thank you again, especially all the participants from different countries, and I wish you a peaceful and blessed Advent. Don't suffer too much from the pandemic limitation.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.